This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the town of North Haven.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Board of Finance on April 19th, 2023. We do have our agenda in front of us. Before we get into the agenda, we'd like to welcome our newest member down to my left here, Lori Jean Hannon, who most of you in town know well. She was formerly one of our registrar of voters. So I'd like to welcome Lori Jean to the Board of Finance.
Thank you, Tim.
All right, thank you. Why don't we start with the minutes of last month's meeting? If there's any questions or comments on the minutes, please.
Actually, Tim, before we get into the minutes, could I just make a quick amendment to the agenda? If you go down to item number 4, I believe that the date finalizing fiscal year, I think the date is supposed to be 2023-24.
You are correct. Thank you. I'll assume that was a motion.
Yes, that was a motion.
I'll second the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, so that brings us back to the minutes, please.
Okay, motion to accept.
Second, please.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Before we get into the, old business does say none, but Mike, I don't know if this might be the right spot. Nancy did ask for this information on our ARPA money. Maybe that's something you might want to just talk about briefly for a second.
Okay. So you have the sheets in front of you. Mrs. Barrett requested this, which I was more than happy to supply. So I want to take you through this because there was a question regarding how much of the ARPA was spent in one fiscal year versus this fiscal year. So if you'd like, I want to take you through this slowly, and maybe you can make some notes. So if we look at this, the first item, the Catholic Charities, fiscal year 22. COVID test kits, fiscal year 22. The next section, Parks and Outdoor Recreation. Vanacore football field track scoreboard, all of that, plus Vanacore engineering, fiscal 22.
Has that money all been spent? That has not been spent. It's just allocated.
It's allocated, and some of it's been spent, but those are the totals that are being spent. Pool CPR training equipment, FY23. The pool, 23, fiscal year 23. ADA bleachers for the soccer fields and the player benches at Memorial Field. That was fiscal year 22. ADA bleachers for the baseball fields and the player benches at Montewiese, FY22. Montewiese playground, FY22. The Montewiese Park benches and the rental bleachers, that was for the football team, FY23. Phillips Place, that was a significant drainage problem. We got that cleared through the federal government, that was FY22. Fire Rescue Ambulance, FY22. Police Cruisers, fiscal year ending 23. Body Armor, 23. Fire Administrative Support Vehicle, 23. Regional Police Command Vehicle, FY22. The next 3 items on technology, fiscal year 23. The Milestone Recording Server, municipal use, FY22. Now, the consultant fee, we hired a national consulting firm who specializes in this.
Skipped. Mike, I think you skipped
You did.
Milestone.
You skipped the SI, yeah.
FY22.
Okay, consultant?
The consultant, that's BDO, we have an allocation of $40,000 for them, and $48,000 was spent in FY22. The balance will probably be spent in this fiscal year, so that It will not exceed 140, and it perhaps may come in less. Now, the 1,670,000 that's classified as revenue replacement by the federal government, that's in this current fiscal year, FY '23. So if you note in the revenue figures, that's part of our revenue this year, 1,670,000. Now, the 1,170,000, that was in last fiscal year ending FY '22. So right now, we've either spent or encumbered that bottom line number,
$7,006,000.
yeah, $7,006,000. And we have been allocated $7,008,000. That's where we're at. So.
We passed the hat?
So we had a meeting with BDO. BDO said to me last Friday, Mr. Frieda, we deal with a lot of municipalities, but you're the tightest municipality we've dealt with in terms of locking this in where we have, and then reporting procedures. So the way this works, April, the end of this month, a report has to go into the federal government. This report will go in, and this report will include purchase order numbers. And but the consultant will be filing that for us. So that's the way this works.
If the finance department puts this together, is that reporting to the federal government?
No, we supply the report. It's in an Excel sheet.
I just wondered who composes it?
Oh, well, I give the numbers, and the finance department puts the Excel sheet together. And the fire chief was helping me for a year on this also.
All right. Now, these items here, they all, I don't just have any specific disagreements with any of them. But were these items here, these choices, were they discussed or approved or whatever with the Board of Selectmen?
No. These are all, this is,
Just internally generated?
Yes.
Choices by you and the finance department and other department heads?
and overseen by the federal government.
Well, no,
Right.
they qualify
Right.
as expenses.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's always nice to spend $7 million anyway you want, but I would say that you've done it in a way that it's hard to disagree with.
Well, so we had a choice to make. Now, there were some municipalities that spent it all in giving grants to businesses, okay?
Yeah.
So I'm a big business supporter. We're bringing in new businesses every week here, but businesses, in my opinion, already got a lot of PPE money from the federal government. So all of this was designed to help the residents of North Haven, to put this money back into tangible improvements for kids, for parks, for playscapes, and in the beginning, the feedback we got from the residents on giving free test kits was huge. And we gave the last of them out at the last concert series.
Okay, yeah, no, I was just more or less talking about process, just, we did get into this discussion at the beginning of this series of funding from the federal government as to whether we wanted any groupthink or any other process of deciding how and how much, in what ways the money would be spent. But again, a fair amount of this are capital issues that would have had to come out of our budget in one way or another anyway.
It's a good point.
And some of these items were listed in I think even in next year's budget. Is that right?
Information technology.
The cruisers and ambulance or
Some were cut.
the
and some
support vehicles. Is that why, for instance, we only need to fund one police cruiser in the next year's budget?
That's partially why, yes. But coming back to your point, though, we took the capital expenditures last year for police cruisers and this fire apparatus out of that budget to get down to a net capital amount of roughly $379,000, roughly.
Yeah.
And we paid for it through this. So
Our capital budget last year was significantly less
That's right.
than it is for
Yes.
the proposed, meaning for the current fiscal year. But related to that, Mike, I do have one question about technology, the three items for purchases for technology, 45,000, 10,000, and 15,000. I think I asked this question because in our capital budget, we still have a line item for 71,441. Is that different from these three line items that you see listed here? Because you said that they are for fiscal year 2023, and I wasn't sure whether that is covered this year or for next year.
Does that have to do with the improvements for the cyber?
It's not really clear, it just says information technology and a line item of 71, and it just happens to be the same rough amount of money for the next fiscal year, that is.
I recall there was some money that had to be spent on cyber issues during the budget presentation. I do recall that.
Right. I just remember something about desktop
remember the-
computers and that type of thing, which obviously is listed here, so.
I think that's part of it. I do remember that. I would remember that because I'm big into cyber.
Mhm.
So that was definitely part of that.
All right, any other questions or comments on the ARPA money? Okay.
I also want to thank Mr. Frieda and whoever else put this report together. This is the kind of clarity and transparency that we should expect, but are glad to have. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Mike, thank you. All right, why don't we move into our reports? So let's start with the revenue.
Actually, still as part of old business, I just had a request about something I had asked for before. Since we only have one more meeting in this fiscal year, which is next month, we'll be expecting to see the closeout for 21-22 and meet with Mr. Santafanti.
Let me handle that, Tim.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure,
Yeah,
go
that's-
ahead.
and you did ask that question, so, we had anticipated 2 months ago that he would be at this meeting. He's requested an extension. He will definitely be at the May meeting.
Maybe. Okay,
Maybe the next meeting.
excellent.
It's nice to close out last year before this year.
Yes. Just barely, yeah.
And by the way, just so you know, the reason for this is that
Yeah.
with so much, with so
Oh, it's
many.
a great transition
Yeah.
going on. Yeah.
You got it.
Okay.
Okay, why don't we move on to revenues, please? Any questions for Ingrid?
Well, our favorite line, paramedic fees, is behind. Way behind, right, Dan?
Yes, but I do have to say, building fees and fire fees are
Yep.
way up, and I'm very glad to see, because again, we're at 9 months into the year, so we really should be at about 75% for most things. So it's very nice to see that those numbers are up. Again, it's never quite clear to me how much of our paramedic billing we're actually giving away to Nelson, but certainly the value added of having those additional ambulances available to supplement our own paramedics here in town seems to be something that is very valuable. And so, but I agree with you, the paramedic services, if we're going to
Yeah.
budget for it, then we have to see it. I agree with you. Our interest in short-term investments is very impressive. Mr. Frieda, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, what we've done is, we have gone to all of our banks, and Rich Monaco and myself, and what we've done is, we've not only increased our investment income by putting putting money into accounts that are yielding 3.7 and 4.3%, but what we've done is with all the banks that we deal with, we've negotiated anywhere from 4.7 to 5% on interest, which we never had before. So essentially what we've done is, we've gone from 0.1%, 0.2%, to now anywhere from 3.7 to 5 points on interest on cash on hand. So that's why you see this jumping. That was one of the strategies we had to offset some potential income losses.
Thank you.
Anything further from the members on revenue?
What was the sale of town property?
Good question. The 20,000.
Yeah, the 20,000.
Mhm.
Just a second.
Ingrid, I'm assuming was it vehicles, piece of equipment?
Yes, sale of equipment.
So what happens with this is, we have vehicles that are going out of service, and we auction them out. We auction them off. We've been doing that for years here. And we've gotten pretty good values, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, so that's what we see there.
Okay. And just to also to point out, on the very first page under tax revenue, our interest and liens is at over 100%, almost 108%. So again, that certainly can reflect collections from previous years, but I think that's also an indication that there are still people that are unable at some point to pay all of their taxes and have to pay it with interest. And we also have to pay in order to obtain that money through our lawyers. So.
Okay, anyone else? All right, thank you. Why don't we move on to revenues? Sorry, that's expenses, sorry.
I have something on page 1, the election day expense. What is that for? We went over budget. Is that in preparation for?
Yes, there was increased costs. We had primary and state elections too. And we have dedicated phone lines for the polls.
Okay.
That was that.
If I could just make a request, Ingrid, for future expense budgets, if we could just have printed at the top of the page that this is through, in this particular case, March 31st of 2023. I think we typically have that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it
We-
says,
we
it says
do-
for
yeah.
2023-09.
Yeah, we need the
Okay.
month.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it says
On the
9.
side.
Month and
It-
day.
It says 9/2023, so it shows 9 months.
Well,
Yeah, in the
again, you have
bottom
to
it
know what that
says-
means.
Yeah, like
It's not the 9th month, it's
Right.
9 months in.
Yeah.
But again, I think typically in the past, we've seen through, 3/31/23. And I think there were a couple of departments, fire being one of them, where the order of the line items seemed to be a little bit scrambled. But again, that's just a formatting issue. I had a question, and I think I might know the answer, but on page 4, for public libraries, it looks like there was a month-to-date expense of $25,000. Was that the staircase?
Yes,
Okay.
that was the resident that almost tripped on it, so we had to do that repair.
Let's see. On page 6, under personnel policy expenses, contract obligations, this could just be a result of how this particular line item is paid, but it seems like this was a really big chunk all at once. Is it paid like quarterly, or how does this work? It's $243,000 in 1 month.
It depends on how we settle contracts and how it gets paid by human resources.
Okay.
So if something gets settled, then you pay the remaining part of the year's back pay on that? I'm not quite.
This one has to be this year. I'll have to ask about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be, and apparently it's apparent, but we may have underfunded that, depending on what payments occur in the last 3 months. But the amounts usually would correlate to what we believe each union would be paid if the contract was settled on time as opposed to being in some sort of arrears. But okay, if you can provide any clarification on that, we'd like that.
Sure.
I have another question on page 5, maintenance of grounds. So we're encumbering, we're gonna go over, what's this, is there a special reason for that?
Yes, this is a bid. It's actually an open PO. I can double check. So what they do is that they encumber the amount for the remainder of the year. It might be less than that, but that's how the PO works.
Okay, because their budget is 35,000, we've spent 31, and we're encumbering almost 19. That's why it stands out.
Yes,
All right, so it's in the bid process, is what you're saying?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
So we're bidding for the balance of the year, Ingrid?
No. This is a bid that was already accepted.
Yeah.
And then it goes from part of this year till next year.
Oh, I
So
see.
just to the part of
So
this
the
year.
encumbrance, you think, actually is,
Pertains to that, yes.
but does that pertain partially to next year or just this year?
No, that's just this fiscal year.
So we are
I'll
low
take
on,
I'll double check on that. but
right, which makes this
Yes.
contract more like 50,000, we've only budgeted 35.
Right,
And I think historically, we've gone over that line throughout the years.
All right, that would be good to know, actually.
Yep.
Yeah, we need, because maybe we're not
I completely
budgeting
agree.
right in that
I
line.
completely agree.
If I can make one point on that, it's like I said at the town meeting 2 weeks ago, everything that we outsource has gone up.
Yeah,
All these bids, all these projects. And you heard me say that we had a project that came in like $750,000 on drainage. We can't do it, so, and that's part of this.
On page 7, I think one of our favorite central facilities, maintenance and repairs of town building. It looks like this last month we had an $11,000 project and an encumbrance for almost $28,000. Any insights as to what that means?
Yes, we had an elevator inspection. That was a state mandate for $7,000. That's some of the things that we had there. The town hall boiler repair, it was $1,400. We had to repair the automatic door for the town hall. That was $2,500. There was a vault repair in the registrar's office. And there was also the steam pipe wall at the emergency ops. It was $7,000, and that was below our deductible. So we had to pay for that. And there was a lot of other things, but that was the major category. So.
And those all fall under that one line as
Yes.
opposed to different
Yes.
departments? On page 11, it appears as though we had a fire department OSHA safety mandate that was budgeted at, oh no, I'm sorry, next line down. Technology that was budgeted at 27, and it looks like year-to-date we've spent almost 35.
That was also an unforeseen state mandate. It was $24,000. And also was for the EPCR system. It was a sole source for the dispatcher software.
the dispatcher software is a sole source provider.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
Dispatch. Okay.
Any other questions on the expenses?
On page 12, it appears as though the tipping fees, thankfully, are coming in even less than what we budgeted them. Mr. Frieda, do you have any insights as to where you expect that to be going?
I think Memorial Day is going to be a key to see what happens with that. May traditionally is a higher month, so with trash pickup because of holidays. So we're hoping it comes right in online, if not less. You know, tipping fees have gone up all over the state. That's a major problem at the state level right now. in terms of municipal waste. And part of the problem is that there are no repositories anymore in Connecticut, so with the freight cost of diesel going up, it gets reflected in increased tipping fees. And so I think, Nancy, to answer your question, for me, the key would be Memorial Day, see how that comes in.
Is the bulk pickup in the tipping fees, or is it somewhere else?
I think it's somewhere else in here, so.
I did look at some of the commodity items, obviously oil, gas, electricity, utilities type of things, and not surprisingly, we are up in a bunch of areas. We are down, surprisingly, in a couple spots, well, not surprisingly, but I think one of them was, might have been streets and roads, but I believe that's probably because we had a light winter, so I think there was less gas and oil used there. Yeah, here it is, streets and roads, we're actually only at 64%, and only spent $5,000 for the month.
But our equipment rental is high.
Yeah, we've talked about this, I forget what that's for,
What is
remember?
that? Yeah, the equipment rental?
That was the leaf pickup.
That's,
There was extra runs for resident calls.
okay, it was the extra runs.
Yes.
And we are expecting that at the end of the fiscal year, MRSA money will be appropriated for streets and roads, correct? So many of these numbers that are over budget, we're hoping will be then corrected as a result of,
Yeah, that's for that's what it's used for, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, any final questions on expenses?
Just a similar question to the labor contract expense line. Medical insurance expenses, we seem to always take out 1/12 of our annual expense on a monthly basis. So the expenses then should not be geared to claims per se. We just run that account either as a surplus or a deficit, is that?
I think we just flatline it, Mike. I mean, we straight line the expense, that's all.
Yeah, so we straight line the expense, knowing there's going to be these vicissitudes in each month depending on the claims, but we have a budgeted number, we just straight line it.
Yeah,
112.
there's no correlation between this and actual payments.
Right.
Right, so we don't have any running ideas to how our allocation of expenses is running via, in relation to the actual cost of self-insuring. That is connected to claims.
Mhm. Connected to claims, yes.
I guess the question is it possible, Mike, to get our insurer to let us know how we're doing relative to our,
Yeah, we did not have a meeting this year.
Yeah, we can do that. We can do that. What's happened is we've dropped off some high months and have gone into lower months, but that's going to be reflected, that's already reflected in this budget that we presented to the public, so.
Yeah, with the number that our agents
Yes.
told us to budget for.
Yes. But, yeah, we can do that, Michael, your request.
Yeah, any summary report would be helpful.
Okay.
I just had a quick capital question that's on page 18. It looks as though we didn't spend any money this month, but we do have encumbrances for both Public Works, John Deere. I'm sure this is a vehicle of some sort that we approved, but also for the senior center, these 100 chairs that we approved at $20,200, we only have an encumbrance for 11. Are we doing this in batches, or
Yes.
are we only?
We decided to do it in batches.
So both batches this year, or one batch this year and one batch next year?
I'll have to ask about that.
Okay.
I believe it's more towards supply issues, so they supplied those first. I can ask if they're going to be expensed this year.
Okay, thank you.
all right, why don't we move on to special funds? Any questions on special funds?
Yes.
Heard a yes out of Michael. Do you have a question, Mike?
Yeah. Well, talk about batches. The police line, expenses versus revenue, is that just when invoices come in, or when somehow the invoices for certain work have to be paid? Or when revenue, I mean, how does the revenue correlate with the expense line for police? As listed here in the report, just so that, other people know what we're talking about here, the March revenue came in at 81,000, while the March expense was 167,000. Now, obviously, it was not probably for the exact same amount of projects or time. Is there any way of understanding that at all? Or?
Even the year-to-date is pretty close. The revenue is 932,000, and the expense is 843,000.
Ingrid, do you need to look into that for us?
Yeah, I have to
Why
look
don't you
at
do that, and then we'll...
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Maybe I can give you an answer. So the expenses go out. We pay for the salaries, we pay for whatever it is, okay? Then we get reimbursed, and then there's an administrative charge on the reimbursed that we collect. So there could be a lag between us paying the expense and us being reimbursed for the revenue.
Oh, yeah.
And that's
Okay.
what this is. So,
Okay.
but it ends up smoothing out.
Okay. And I noticed that both MRSA and the fire inspection line items have been removed. Is that something that we should expect going forward will only be seen in the revenue and expense budgets, or will they also be shown here on the special funds?
I'm gonna answer that.
This is up to you.
So we agreed that we were going to show the full revenue on the old MRSA, right, in the revenue side. Okay, so in the end, there'll be a reconciliation, a separate report of how much went out on the streets and roads versus the allocation we received.
Okay. But also, it should show the starting balance.
Yes.
Which is what really the value of this.
Yes, so that will happen.
Because this is like a bank account, if you will.
That's right. Right. Now, what was the second part of the question?
And
Fire
the other is fire, the fire inspections, both the plan review and, the sources of revenue that we derive from those plan review
And inspection.
and inspections are
So I know we're-
typically
Right, we're
provided.
contemplating a change on that. Let's get an update as to where we are on that, okay?
And also, both the revenue and, of course, the expense for those inspectors that are working for us. Okay.
All right, thank you, Nancy. Why don't we go to the Board of Ed?
I might have missed this, but within Howard's very nice memo on the front page, he refers to a cafeteria fund. Is that something that is kind of embedded within their budget, or is this a separate thing that's almost like another special fund for them?
Truthfully, I caught that as well, Nancy.
Yeah. Kind of jumped out at me.
Yeah, that shows up in the audit, I think, at the end of the year.
I think it does too, but,
It is a special thing.
yeah.
The only special funds that I was aware of were medical and dental, special ed, and capital. So it could be that they, like on the town side, have several special funds, but these are the only ones that,
In our annual report, I think there's at least 22 special funds, or there were.
on the town side.
Well, include both.
I think it's
Include
both.
both.
I see, okay.
By the way, I don't mean that this probably isn't the perfect time for this, but I did see Howard, I did ask him at the town meeting about the memorandum of understanding,
Yes,
because they're okay with it, we just haven't gotten it signed. So once it gets signed, we'll put it in the package.
okay. It appears as though they're at about 75% between expenditures and encumbrances, which is pretty much where you would hope they would be at this point.
All right, any final questions on?
Yeah, on Board of Ed, the report on the medical or dental and pharmacy reserve account here states 117% of midpoint. Is that 117% of what they have been recommended to have on reserve? What is that midpoint?
My recollection is they gave them a range, Mike, of reserves, and this is the midpoint of the range,
Yeah.
and that, so they're at 117% of that recommended midpoint.
Okay. So that, in that situation, if they don't draw from it, they're not going to have to fund that any further?
Well, again, there's a range, so I guess depends on what your,
The range is.
yes, but I mean, you could argue that they're 17% above the midpoint of the desired reserves. So,
So there are three different levels according to the actuary. There's the minimum level, the mid level, and the max level. So they happen to be at the mid level. So this is,
Oh, okay, all right. Thank you.
stick with me.
Thank you very much.
yeah.
Yeah. And as far as the use of the money in those reserve accounts, do they have any sort of, do they go to their finance committee to decide how and when to use those reserve funds?
Well, I don't know the exact answer, Mike, but don't forget, I mean, these are basically for tail claims. That's what they really are, right?
No, I was talking about all the reserve accounts. I'm talking about special ed, workers' comp, and capital projects and so forth. They have an approval process for just how to use their funds?
Well, I mean, don't forget, we just finalized the MOU, and the MOU says they have to, well, for the ones
signed
under,
yet.
It's not
for the
signed
ones
yet,
under the
that's right.
MOU, they have to go to their board and,
Yeah.
and come, on the ones that aren't covered by the MOU, I don't know the exact process they go through, unfortunately.
Communication from Howard is very good.
Right. Anything else on the reports? If not, I'll take a motion.
Make the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Second. Okay, got the second.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, so we've got the budget. I'll make a couple comments first, if we don't mind, please. First off, you've got a decrement sheet, which you'll notice, decriment's probably not the right term because it's really a change in the line items.
Yes.
And I'll take a shot at this, and if I fail, I think Mike will probably cover for me. So there's no change in the dollars allocated to the fire department in total. The total is the same as it was our last meeting, and the total for the overall budget's unchanged. What has changed is the employment tables, which are on page, is it 42? Hang on, I got it tab, 42, yes. So you'll notice on page 42, the consultants, and we're gonna change that title, by the way.
Yes.
But they're listed there. So I think you might have heard Pat Nuzzle talk about this at the town meeting. So we had a full-time and a part-time fire inspector. We have, the town has, I should say, decided to move them to employees at the same pay and at the same budget line item as they were as consultants. They will not be receiving any benefits, so there's no change in the benefit there. On page 42, I think we'll probably ask Ingrid to strike consultant and put employee there, just so that that's consistent with the rest of the table. And Mike, if I missed anything on that story, please interject.
So you heard the chairman get up at the meeting, and I had a meeting with the chief and the two individuals, and I proposed a solution, and they liked the solution. And the solution is to take them out as consultants, put them in as employees, and what that does for the fire department and for the town, it pulls them under the umbrella for general liability. Because without doing it that way, without that solution that I proposed, the town and the fire department would be vulnerable from a liability standpoint. So the two individuals are protected personally, the fire department's protected and the town's protected. And it was a solution that we were able to do. So what Tim just said is, we have to just remove the consultants, make them employees, and that's all we need to do on that, and we're covered.
So by the way, on page 26, having heard what you just heard, you would think they'd be under personnel full-time or part-time?
Page 28.
28, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
They remain listed as fire inspector, fire investigators at the bottom.
Yeah.
Basically because Rich wants to track to make sure that they don't go over, so they're shown below, but they are.
Yeah, I think that we should just remove that line and simply add up at the top, under personnel full-time, increase that line item from $4,046,969 to $4,146,969, and then add another line that is personnel part-time, and just make that 50,000. Because technically, that's what we're really talking about doing. We're converting this from a line item down lower in the budget to something that is reflected in the employment table. The only way you do that is if you include it as personnel full-time or personnel part-time. Am I correct, Mr. Frida?
I think we can do that, yes.
Okay.
I do.
So that's purely from an accounting standpoint. I think that's the proper way to do it. I'd just like to address this more from a support standpoint. While I certainly support this transfer of these two individuals to become employees, because this is very risky work. It is also very important to the town, not just as a source of revenue, but really for public safety. They're not out there, painting fire hydrants. They're actually taking risks in performing inspections of new facilities, existing facilities, as well as modified new construction. However, and so therefore they need coverage just by the very nature of their work. So I certainly support this idea of making them employees and having them covered by our liability insurance. But I think it's also very important that we do this correctly, now, and that we do this correctly going forward. So the first question is, are we switching these two individuals to full-time and part-time employees in the current fiscal year, in addition to what we're talking about for the next fiscal year?
Yes.
Okay, so you're talking about doing that immediately in addition to what we're talking about, which is just simply an accounting issue for the next fiscal year budget?
Yes.
Okay, so where is the budgetary authority to actually switch them and change the employment table in the current fiscal year? That's the first question.
Yeah, I think because we're not adding any more dollars, we can just simply do it. That's my opinion.
Well, I think I mentioned that last meeting, I had an email exchange with Jeff, and that's in effect what he said, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's an employee classification.
Yeah, right. So
Right.
now, if there was a dollar difference, then that's a
Right.
different thing. But
Yeah, I think we were talking about two different things, Tim. I think you brought this issue up because we were talking about the library budget, and the Director of Library Services wanted to have kind of a placeholder line item for a potential additional spot that she would only fill if she had additional funds to do so, so it wouldn't change her budget. This is actually changing the employment table of our budget, which again, according to what former Town Attorney Seula said, this requires not only a Board of Finance vote, but for any amount greater than $20,000, it actually requires a town meeting. And it does incur additional funds in the current fiscal year. If we're approving it for the next fiscal year, well then we're approving both monies, both for the full-time and for the part-time. But we never approved this position in the current fiscal year budget. Isn't that true?
I can talk with Jeff again, Nancy. I mean, I don't know anything about having to go to a town meeting for this, okay? I mean, unfortunately, I brought just sort of my current information. I had a whole bunch of stuff at home which I didn't bring, which included the email from Jeff. But I think what I said last time, I don't think I limited myself just to that one example you gave. I think that example was to say we have an item here that was budgeted at, well, it showed at zero, right? For the purpose that we thought there might be some movement there. But I think what I said was that Jeff's opinion is that we approve dollars, not positions, and that if the fire department stays within their budget, then it's okay.
Tim, I think your reaction when you were asked about this, at least the part-time position, that you were surprised that this individual had already been hired and was already working in the current fiscal year.
That's correct.
And not necessarily just what was told to us by the fire chief was that he was going to be hired for the next fiscal year. So I think that this person shouldn't have been hired, even though I absolutely approve of the work that they do, and I think they need to be covered by our insurance if they do it. I'm just objecting to the process here of changing our employment table mid-fiscal year when this is not a crisis. I think if there are things that, you know, are presented to this board that represent a real crisis, then certainly we need to vote on this. But I'm pretty sure that that this is something that cannot be supported by our town charter, and that there really is no basis for switching the employment table mid-fiscal year. It's not in our budget, nor is it reflected in the employment table. And those dollars aren't there either. So it is more money.
Nancy, I'd be happy to reopen this with Jeff, but that's not my recollection, but I'd be happy to reopen the question with Jeff. If you've got some information from Mr. Ciula, who obviously was Jeff's former partner, then...
Yeah, although this is a technicality, we do make decisions as to whether to hire, what our need is for consultants throughout the year. There are consultant lines. Right.
For sure.
And that's how this, I think that this position was initiated. And then I think that because of the intelligent move to make these town employees, although it violates, I think, what we want to see technically happen, because it's in the best interest of the town, I think that it's worth overlooking it in this situation.
Well, as Tim said, we'll look into it, but let me tell you what the risk is, ladies and gentlemen. The risk is, we gotta be very careful with this. We could lose the individual who is known as the best in the business right now. He's with us. That's number one. Number two, we're open for liability for the rest of April, all of May, and all of June. And the risk of that, in my estimation, is much greater than a technicality. But, in fairness, we'll check the technicality out.
Well, the reality is we've experienced this risk since 2016. Isn't that true?
I don't know if it goes back that far. I mean...
That's when
Yeah.
the predecessor
Right.
to the current full-time employee started working in 2016. It wasn't in our budget, but certainly that individual was utilizing a town car, and I remember asking Ed, as well as the fire chief, is this person covered by our town insurance? And they both assured me, oh, yes, absolutely. And apparently that's not the case. So I think there are alternatives. I'm certainly not in any way suggesting that this work isn't important, but there are alternatives because these two individuals, I assume, were hired on an hourly contract. That's why I asked the fire chief during the budget workshop, are they paid with W-2s or 1099s? It's not to find out what form he uses for tax purposes. It's really to find out their insurance. And certainly they could be self-insured for the remainder of this year and simply start the new year as a town employee. There's lots of different ways to resolve this issue, but I think that certainly violating our town charter is not necessarily one that should be on the table. And to that point, of course, we all recognize that there are several consultants that are currently working for the town, and in going through the expenditure budget, I saw that we have consultants in building inspection, public works, engineering, and community services. So, Mr. Frieda, do you think that we should be in any way considering liability exposure risk for those consultants as well?
No. Because they're part-timers and they're doing work for other municipalities and they have their own coverage.
Yeah, my understanding is that Rich met with the department heads, and Ingrid can probably confirm this, and made sure that they had their own insurance, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. So one of these two individuals is part-time as well, right?
For the fire
For
department?
the fire department.
Yes.
So one is full-time and one is part-time. So
Right.
Mr.
Yes.
Frida, referred to these as all as part-time. So
No.
they
No.
carry their own insurance.
Right.
So, yeah, with the building department, because some of them work in other municipalities, Helio is full-time, he works with us, all right?
Okay.
The ones that are contracted out on hourly rate, they have their own other municipalities that they'll get up beyond call for, so they have their own insurance.
They have their own.
In
Right.
this case, in the fire department, it was brought to my attention that they didn't have insurance. And one of them's full-time with us, not working with any municipality. The other one's a retired North Haven firefighter who is working now part-time to fulfill this role.
All right, I will bring it up with Jeff and/or Mike, and I will bring it up with Jeff. Let me just mention one other thing before I open it up to the board, if you don't mind, please. I think those of us who were at the town meeting heard an individual get up and talk about, this is page 28, sorry, fire department, the fire associations.
Yes.
And there was a request that we amend what we have here, so just a refresher for those in attendance. The current budget has $33,000 for the fire association. It was $11,000 a firehouse. That was cut back to 13. There was a call for more. I know, Nancy, this was one of the ones that was on your list that you provided and we talked about last month. And one of the reasons I think for that was that in the prior year, we'd only expended, I think it was $500. I've talked with Ingrid. I think there was some other expenses in the prior year that got booked to other GLs, and that's why the 500 seemed exceptionally low in relation to the budgeted amount. So I guess I would put it to the board, if they feel strong enough about this particular item, to restore it up to $22,000, which would be a $9,000 increase. In which case, by the way, sorry for 1 second, we would not change the overall budget. We believe there's a little bit of room in the medical, which is on page,
Take it from there.
yeah, that's obviously a big number, Mike. It's,
Yeah.
I'll get it, hold on.
Okay.
It's on page 36, the medical's $7,318,000, so we would adjust that line by a like amount.
Yeah, I support that move. If you need a motion, you know,
Well-
it's just a working document, right? We don't need, do we
Well,
need a motion?
actually, it raises a really important point. And just to clarify for those listening at home, when I went through this budget with a fine-tooth comb and looked at historical data, I simply looked at disparities between the budgeted amount and the actual amount. And when there were big gaps, I said, oh, that's an opportunity to trim that budget. And this happened to be one line item, and we can only rely on the historical data that's available. This particular line item, I believe 2 years ago was only $1,500, last year was only $500, and as of last month, year-to-date, we had spent exactly $0 on this. I spoke with the fire chief after the public hearing, and in fact, he said that for whatever reason, expenses for that particular line item were coming out of the building department. I don't know why, but in this current month's expense reports, it appears as though the Volunteer Association year-to-date expense is about $8,500 with an encumbrance of about $12,000. So it's gone from zero to now a total of expected about $20,000. So if that is the new and accurate information, I am completely in support of a $22,000 budget line item for the next fiscal year.
And what it does is, we had $33,000 for the 3 volunteer firehouses, and I support this big time also. I asked the volunteer firefighter what he thought the number was. I spoke with the chief after. So now if we bring it back up to 22, knowing that we have a paid department down at Monteluise, it brings it back to an allocation of 11 and 11 for the 22. So I think it's the right move.
Yeah, our volunteers, as few as there are, should know that the town is behind them.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And also, the thing that confuses it is that the volunteer associations also have, according to the fire chief, several different sources of funding, not just from the town, but they also, just prior to Easter, had I think a flower and plant sale, and that brings in revenue to the association. They have lots of different fundraisers, and so there's lots of different sources of information, but I think certainly as part of our budgetary process, we certainly should support our volunteers, and I'm all in favor.
All right. I'll take any other comments on the budget at this time.
So if we increase that amount, what are we decreasing?
Health insurance.
Medical insurance, okay. And Mr. Frieda, I know that the bottom line numbers were the same, but were there any other changes? I certainly went through it and saw the 5 changes that we made that added up to $440,000 were certainly included in this budget, but were there any other ups and downs that canceled each other out?
No.
Okay. And on page 26, I think we did agree to, I believe it was within the police department, to split out that $70,000 line item for building maintenance, repairs, and supplies, because it also included $30,000 for munis changes to payroll. So that, jumping from 29,300 in the current fiscal year up to 70, the explanation was that this additional cost was folded in, and I thought we had agreed that we would simply split that out into a separate line item.
No, we did. That's good cash. We can do that, right, Ingrid?
Okay.
What line do you?
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's on page 26. It's
about-
building maintenance, repairs, and
Yes,
so.
yes, I see
Halfway
it. What
down.
line do you want to split that? Most of those expenses are building maintenance, but you want to allocate the munis expense to another line?
Just,
Is
can we
that
create
fair?
another line?
Yeah, if you could just create another line, because again, going forward, I think it
Okay.
would be distortive to have that $70,000 in there. Yeah, and I think we covered all of my other questions.
All right. Mike, did you want, you're
Yeah.
looking at me, you must have something on your mind.
Just, it's unrelated issue here.
Well, if it's unrelated,
No,
On a related.
oh, related, sorry.
A-related.
Okay.
yeah. It's all part of the mix, part of the menu here. We generate taxes and revenue based on our grand list. And so I just had one question at this time about the grand list. And it has to do with something that we've mentioned here before, and the third selectman has mentioned in previous times here, about, because we want to see this grow and continue to grow for years to come. And so that the whole personal property depreciation, which is a huge deduction from our grand list here. Well, I say huge in terms of just raw value. I mean, percentage-wise, it's tiny. But when Amazon decreases their personal property by $15 million in a given year, I just wanted to know and by the way, their economic incentive increase in the past year was $7.9 million through the phase-in. I just wanted to know if the assessor was totally on board with Amazon's figures and their treatment of personal property, or do we audit or do we review their numbers in any way whatsoever?
We do. And we end up working with them behind the scenes to either negate or listen to how they feel the depreciation should be, and we always work out an amicable solution with them. So, in fact, they wanted more of the depreciation, and they agreed with our numbers.
Oh, well, that's helpful to know.
Yes.
Because, that's a great disappointment. It's like a setback. It naturally happens, and we know about the depreciation methods of how it's done in an accelerated fashion for their own tax purposes. And I think you said you're hoping that they'll do some personal property replacement in the near future.
They will be. I'm very close with them. You're going to see an internal expansion, an increase in personal property.
This is all the work that you do for economic development is is impacted by things like that.
That, and like I said earlier, I didn't say it here, I said it earlier today, about any BAA assessments that, we see that we don't know about till after the fact. You see it on the arrears taxes. We took a big hit on that.
Right, yes, we know that a few years in there that commercial properties did take a hit, so, yeah.
But you make a good point, so thank you.
Okay. As long as the public knows what wins we're facing here.
And Mike, just to clarify, because I know you mentioned accelerated depreciation, so just for people here at home, they can't take accelerated depreciation for this purpose. That's a tax.
Yeah,
Correct.
okay.
Correct.
I didn't know if I did not know what depreciation schedule they're using here.
Well, they might have a...
Is it straight line?
Well, they might have a disagreement with the town over what's to use, but bonus depreciation, accelerated depreciation, that's a tax.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yes,
I mean-
all right, that was the wrong term.
Right.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Any further comments on the budget?
The position that we talked about related to the public library is a substitute librarian. Does anyone know whether that is considered a full-time position, or is it literally a substitute, much like a substitute teacher?
Substitute, my understanding is a substitute teacher.
So it would be like an hourly
Yeah.
line item? Okay, I'm fine with that.
All right, all's quiet. I'm not hearing anything else, so
As we make our motions, I may add some comments, but we can make the motions at any time.
Ingrid, do me a favor. I'm just going to do the math, but you want to check the math for the resolution too? So it's really just the town government side.
Increase 22. Okay. Don't you just basically go to page 39?
I'm on page 4, but
What page are you?
page 4.
The numbers.
Well, I think I got the right numbers. So just on the town government side, it's just the three numbers, which the capital, the reserve, and then the total town government, so. You want me to give the number that I got?
Yes.
I got for the town government, 59,856,429. Board of Ed is listed here, 61,643,954. And when I added those, I got the total of 121,500,383. Okay?
And as far as we know, Mike, the addition of these two individuals in the fire department is not going to change the cost of our insurance premiums in any
No.
way? No.
No, because that's already been forecasted, which is in the budget. And then next year, we'll see what happens, but no, not.
Yeah, I meant for the next year's budget.
We're good on that. We're
So
good.
an additional two is just a drop in the bucket?
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure, given the nature of their work, whether that would be a blip or not. Okay.
So before I read the resolution, oh, go ahead, Ingrid, sorry.
Go ahead, yes.
Okay.
You're fine.
Okay, so before I read the resolution, Ingrid, just, I don't think it's required, but just so we know what we're doing here. So on page 28, so Nancy asked that we take the fire inspector, fire investigators line, we increase personnel full-time by 100 and create a part-time line for 50, for presentation purposes, if you will. Right? Likewise, on that page, we're going to increase the volunteer associations to 20,
Yes.
sorry, to 22. Yeah, that's the right number, sorry. Okay? That will come out of, on page 36, the medical insurance line will be reduced by 9,000, which I believe should get you to 7,309,000. There, go ahead. Page 36. So the medical insurance active retirees,
Okay.
so I believe that number now should be 7,309,031. And then the final change that I had was on page 42. We are just going to change consultant under fire where it says part-term fire investigator, inspector, and
To employee.
to just employee, right? All
Right,
right.
and then the fire inspector, fire investigator line will be 0 in page 28.
Yes, that would be 0. Okay?
And we will see on a monthly basis the expenditure for those two positions, even
Right.
though one will be folded into personnel full-time.
Yes.
Well, how are we going to see them with that? But that's why Richie did it this way, but you've asked we move this, so you're not going to see them, no.
They will be in the line.
It's gonna be in the
right?
line, yeah.
That
Right.
was the purpose of keeping
Right, that was the
them
whole purpose of
separate.
doing it this way.
Because otherwise it would be
It will be with the other full-time
Right, it's gonna
employees.
come-
we don't have any other part-time, so we'll certainly see the part-time.
We'll see the part-time
The
line, yeah.
part-time, but not
Yeah,
the
Not
full-time.
the full-time, right, yeah. All right. I think we got the changes. I'll read the resolution, and then if I could, well, I'll make a motion, and we'll do it that way, then I'll ask for a second. So, I'd like to offer the following resolution, that the Board of Finance recommends a town government budget for fiscal year 23-24 in the amount of $59,856,429. I'll take
Is there a second?
a second.
I'll second it.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. I'd like to make the following resolution, that the Board of Finance recommends a Board of Education budget for fiscal year 23-24 in the amount of $61,643,954.
I'll make a motion.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? And finally, I'd like to offer the final resolution, that a total town budget for fiscal year 2023-2024 in the amount of $121,500,383, town government to be $59,856,429, and the Board of Ed to be $61,643,954, be presented to the annual budget town meeting, which will be held on Monday, May 8th, 2023.
I will second that.
All in favor?
Sir, wait, sir? Could I have a comment before the vote?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Yeah, this budget that represents a noticeable increase certainly compared to past years, is something that has to be supported. And I think that the public, though, should have an understanding of what's within our discretion to change and what is not. And, you know, some of the examples that push this number higher have to do with the ongoing labor contracts or medical insurance, these non-discretionary items, the bond payments, the pension contributions, the utilities. That has to be at least 80% of our budget. And we do have the discretion, say if there was a cut on the labor line, because we have to pay them the rate that's already in the labor contract, that we have a discretion about how many employees we have in town. So if there was a cut somehow that had to be made to a labor line, say if the budget didn't pass, that it would affect the number of employees. And other discretionary items have to do with town projects and capital improvements or the scope and quality of our town services. So if the people from this town, like we in this Board of Finance that put together this budget every year, believe that the town is running with a pretty high degree of efficiency, and if we want to maintain our infrastructure and our financial integrity, there's a price to pay for that. And so, you know, we, despite the increase in the tax rate, we're voting to retain this municipality's influence on our quality of life, and we are voting to support the education system that we currently have. And that's something that every North Haven citizen deserves. So that's why there is likely to be unanimous support for this budget. So with that, I just had to make that point.
All right, thank you, Mike.
That we do the best we can in the circumstances that we face.
All right, any other comments before I call for a vote on the resolution? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. All right, for our public comment, please come to the mic and state your name and address. Sally Boehme.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Sally Boehme, 5 Blossom Drive. First, during your discussion of the revenue budget, there was a talk of the sale of town property. At a Board of Selectmen meeting, you lose track of how many months ago. Time goes so fast. But I think it was last fall, we voted to put a whole bunch of stuff up for sale. And it was, we do this regularly, but it's usually 1 or 2 vehicles or something. This was a list of over 30 items, which I thought was a little unusual. So since that was discussed tonight, a couple of the items were vehicles, but there were a lot of unusual items that we don't normally put up for sale. And I had asked that the finance office provide the Board of Selectmen and perhaps the Board of Finance, but certainly the Board of Selectmen, since we authorized the sales, for a breakdown of the results of the sales. And both of my colleagues on the Board of Selectmen, Mr. Chairman, agreed to that. So I'm just requesting that the Finance Office provide us with that breakdown that was agreed on many months ago.
Okay.
Okay.
I thought that was just sent out, I'm sorry. So
Yeah, do you recall, am I recalling it correctly, Michael? I don't want to, yeah. So I would appreciate that. It was a very unusual list. I did want to comment a bit, first about MRSA being missing from the special funds report. Is it going to be permanently gone? Because that was a way for us to see when you apply for waivers and you receive waivers and you use them for purchases of various equipment, often public works equipment, that was a way for us to sort of track that. I understand that you're going to be budgeting it and showing it as revenue this year, but I still think it would be useful in that purpose to show, because right now there's $3 million in there, and that's without the $2 million plus we're expecting. So that's a lot of money there without us seeing what's going on. So I would still appreciate that being in the special revenue report for that purpose.
Yeah, so if I can comment on this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so our plan was to show it in June, but if you're suggesting we want it for May now, the next month, then we can do that.
Or perhaps, because usually the waivers are done a few at a time, so whenever a bunch of MRSA money is spent, I mean, rather than not, just seeing the amount, spent in the regular expenditure budget, I would like to see, because it would help me in making decisions and future capital requests and budgetary processes down the line, to see what it was spent on. So that's all really I would be interested in, and it seemed like a great way to keep track of it in the past. Okay.
Well, we will do it, our plan was to do it in June, so we'll see what we can do next month.
Okay, that's all. I wanted to say about seeing our beloved MRSA gone from, especially, it kind of pulled at my heartstrings a little. We love MRSA. We love it and hate it, I should say. And I would also like to talk about the transfer of my last issue is the discussion of the transfer of the two, well, they were called consultants for years, I guess. What is the official name? Inspector/investigator? Is that what we're going to go by now?
That's whatever it said in the budget.
Yeah.
The word consultant
For
should be
years, it
dropped.
was the,
Yeah,
No,
that
we-
was
that was
outsourcing, yeah, all right, thank you.
Hold on a second, sorry.
Sure.
No, that was one of the things we talked about,
Right.
Mike, right?
Next slide.
yeah, I think on page 42, the table, it had all three words, so I'm used to consultants, so for now, I'm just going to say consultants, okay? That's what what it's been for years. I just wanted to talk about the transfer of those now two positions over to as town employees. This consultant line has had a dubious past, in my opinion, at best. It was started in October of 2016. I have the contract that was done with Mr. Etherton, who served quite a few years, I believe, as the consultant. And he was put in mid-fiscal year, not budgeted, and paid $62,000. 17-18 fiscal year was not budgeted anywhere in the budget, $89,000 he was paid. Not budgeted anywhere in 18-19, $96,000. Not budgeted in the 19-20 fiscal year, $91,000. And for those of you on the board who've been on for a while, you may recall me complaining about this almost regularly with the former chairman of the Board of Finance, Mr. Monaco, of spending money that was not budgeted, but yet putting it in our monthly expenditure reports. Finally, in fiscal year 2021, it showed up for the first time in our budget book and has been there since at $100,000. I also do not understand let me start by saying, from the beginning, I supported, when the chief made at his workshop the request for an additional $50,000 for this line to fund a part-time person, I was in support of that. I said that publicly, I said it at the fire commission meeting, I wrote it in my column, and I said it at the public hearing. So I want to make that very clear. I always supported the appropriation, but I always thought that it was for the future, the upcoming fiscal year of 23-24. So I don't know what the budgetary authority is for hiring the second guy, as qualified as he is, and he's a great guy, I know him, I don't know what the budgetary authority was for hiring him mid-fiscal year this year. And if you look at your expenditure budget for this month, on page 11, you'll see that the $100,000 consultant fee, which was intended for one, is already at almost $94,000, 94% expended, with $11,000 spent this month. And then I looked at last month's. Here is your expenditure report from last month, which is through February, and that line was $12,000 for the month. So it looks like it's about $11,500 to $12,000 a month. And it's already at almost $94,000 with 3 months to go. So going by the estimate of about $12,000 for April, May, and June, it is clearly going to exceed the $100,000. I believe the Board of Finance, according to Charter Section 707 C, D, and E, has to approve that, because you're exceeding it. You're going to exceed it this year. So when you talk to council, as you said you would when Ms. Barrett brought up this issue, I think that's important to say that with the two of them now working, you're going to exceed the 100,000. Again, you're at 94,000 right now.
So make sure I understand what you're asking, Sally, because obviously you know that we do all kinds of transfers that generally occur in the August meeting. So what are you asking on, for this
Well,
particular?
I think that if they are, Mr. Frieda said that they are being transferred to employees this, right now. And I agree that that's the right decision to solve the liability issue. I said that I fully supported that at the public hearing. I do. We have to have liability. So if they are going to be town employees, and it's exceeding the 100,000, which it's targeted to do, I think that the Board of Finance just has to approve that. But you could ask Attorney D'Onofrio to review Section 707 C, D, and E of the Charter, and also 7-348 of the Connecticut General Statutes to see if he agrees with me.
Because you're saying, and I don't mean to belabor the point,
go ahead.
you're saying it needs to be approved because we're
you're
converting
going to
them
be
to employees?
exceeding.
No,
Well-
exceeding the dollars.
You see,
Yeah.
because
Well,
you
there's
said
lots of-
that you
but
received.
that was my point about August. There's lots of lines that exceed the dollars, right?
Yep.
And there's
Right.
transfers that are made at the end of the year, right? So I'm trying to understand your point now.
Well, I thought that you said before that you talked with Attorney D'Onofrio.
Yes.
And he said, since you're not going over the budgeted amount, it's okay. So I'm saying you're going over the budgeted amount.
Right, you're saying, so if you convert them to employees, right?
Yeah.
Which
Converting them to employees,
hasn't happened just yet, or just happened, one or the other, right?
right, I think that
So the
alone
previous,
needs-
sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
So the previous dollars are still gonna be listed as consultants, I'm assuming, right? But if your point is that for roughly 3 months, if you will, they'll be employees, and that will go into the payroll line, if you will, right?
Right.
Okay, so you're saying if the department goes through that line, they need Board of Finance approval?
Well, that's because of, I'm saying this because of what you said. You said you talked to him, and he said, you're not going over the budgeted amount, so you're fine. That's what you had said.
Yes,
So I'm saying you may be you are possibly going over the budget amount.
Possibly, yeah.
I just think you should look at this again.
Yeah.
And, because I think that the charter provisions I've referenced and the state statute I referenced requires Board of Finance approval by a formal motion. And so that's my opinion. So, but I think it's important to note, based on how that line is tracking, that it will exceed the 100,000.
if you don't mind, I think Mike wants to comment, Sally.
Sure.
So here's how I see it, and we'll certainly check, okay?
Okay,
In September, this is to the general public, okay? Because
Sure.
they might be wondering what this discussion is all about. So in September, I go to the town meeting, and I present the lines that are overexpended, that are over $20,000. So that's a remedy, as long as the total dollar amount in the budget doesn't exceed what was voted on, we have the latitude of lines going over and under, provided the total bottom line doesn't get overspent. That's the town meeting, what's called the budget transfer is over $20,000. So in my mind, we have the remedy with the town meeting that on this particular case, we don't need the Board of Finance approval, because it's not our intention to overexpend the budgeted amount that was voted in on the referendum.
But, excuse me, Mike, but doesn't that presume that the employment table that has been approved by a vote of their town meeting has been maintained? So you have the approved number of people, and even despite our best efforts at budgeting, we've exceeded a given line item. Let's say it's for personnel. But it presumes that you still have that same head count. If you go ahead and increase the head count and then it goes over, I think that's a different circumstance. And I think that's Ms.
that's
Gwen's
pretty
point.
much what I'm getting at. So I
think Mike
yeah,
voiced what was going through my head when you said it, Sally, right?
Okay.
So which is that we're adding 2 individuals, 1.5 FTEs, if you will, for 3 months, right? So we got to, I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me, but the line for the fire department personnel, it's a big number, right? So I guess the question is, okay, If we go to the fire chief and say, are you still gonna hit your personnel line? He says, yes, right? Then I would say it doesn't need a vote. If he says, no, I won't, well, then you may be right,
Okay.
right?
I'm standing here making this argument based on you saying that Mr. D'Onofrio said you're not going over the money. And so
understand you are,
you
but-
didn't say earlier tonight at the meeting, oh, we'll take care of it at the town meeting. You said that was the legal opinion he gave. And that's when I looked at the line and I said, well, I think it is going to go over because it's never gone over the 100,000 before. The closest it came was 21-22, it was 94,000. And again, this was just the one full-time guy. So clearly, it's going over. So that's why I brought it up. I just think that you should check on this again, because the employment table is being changed mid-fiscal year, which I think the Board of Finance is supposed to approve, and the money is changing. That's all that I'm saying. I totally support this money for the fire department. These inspections are critical. They're inspections of existing businesses to make sure that employees and patrons are protected, that there's proper egress out the back door, that it's not being blocked by whatever. And also, they're testing the vent systems and all of the grills of all the restaurants in town. This is very important work that they're doing. And they're also, of course, reviewing new construction and renovation, new construction and new buildings and renovation construction to make sure that our fire codes are being followed. So it's extremely important work. I support the extra position. I just want to make sure that we do it right. And I would also like to make this comment. I'm very the first time I found out about this liability issue was at the public hearing on April 4th. I never knew this. Now, just as Ms. Barrett has done, for years I have asked about insurance coverage for, it was just the one consultant at the time. And I was always told, oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. He's covered. You know, and this is why asking whether he's paid with a 1099 or a W-2 is so important, because 1099s are what you use to pay non-employees or independent contractors or consultants, and they're supposed to have their own insurance. And Mr. Frieda has told us that the building consultants, which is a big line item, about 137,000 I think we're at this year, the community service consultants, all of those consultants have insurance. I don't know why this independent contractor did not have insurance. He's been doing work for us since October of 2016. So I think the town was put at risk. And I know for a fact, this is my letter that I got for my business, because my business was inspected. And I was a little surprised when it came in, because it was signed by the consultant on town letterhead. He gave me his business card, which wasn't his business card as a consultant. It had the town's seal on it, the town of North Haven, a town email. He was wearing a fire department uniform, and he drove off in a fire department vehicle. And I immediately, as soon as he left, my business passed the inspection, thankfully. But as soon as he left, I called Ed. I said, Ed, are you sure what you've been telling me? This guy has, is driving a North Haven car, wearing a North Haven uniform. Is he covered? Yeah, no problem. So I'm a little disappointed that we were put at risk, in my opinion, unnecessarily for all of these years. But going back is not important. Going forward is the right way to do. And I support Mr. Frieda's solution. It's the right solution, and it's a good solution, and we need this extra help at the fire department. Let's just make sure we do it right. So please double check with the town attorney. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sally. Anyone else? Jenny?
Jenny Caldwell, 69 Kimberly Circle, North Haven. Just two quick things, actually three. First is when you're talking about the fire marshal's office, you should also think about the fact they also do fire investigations, so it's not just inspection, but when there's a fire, they're investigating those fires. The other thing is you brought up the paramedic billing, and I believe that the reasons that is behind is because there was a change in the deputy chief, and the billing had stopped during the period of time that that position was empty, and the chief had told us that it would take a while to catch up because he would have to start billing, and there is, in terms of paramedic billing, there's a grace period. So I'm not 100% sure, but I think that might be why what you're seeing in that line is not.
Well, it'd be great if they could bill before June 30th, by the way.
Okay, I'll tell them, hurry up. And then the other thing that I just wanted to bring up, and I brought it up at the hearing, at the town hearing or meeting, was I think that it might be a good idea in the future to start talking about some of the services that are right now free to the public, and one that stands out to me, leaf pickup is something that most people benefit from equally, but certainly the convenience center where people dump things is not an equal, people don't have equal use of it. And so if you have a big truck and you're able to come and get rid of your, construction items, sometimes I'm sure it's business items, certain people are using that facility and getting free dumping, basically. When you go in there and you see especially the dumpsters that are filled with, like I said the other day, there was a machine where a vending machine for a soda or things like that. That's not something that people personally are going to dump. So something to consider is some sort of fee schedule based on weight or something like that, where people who are big users and who dump a lot pay more for that than the typical residential dumper. So that is just a thought about looking at revenue and sort of evening out, the town services for that particular,
Yeah, I think you get like six at a time or something, then I'm not sure if we charge after that.
They don't do that anymore. So you used to get a ticket.
Yeah.
And you could go, when we had the two separate ones, and you could go and, I think I complained about it because I have a small Prius, and people would go in for a truck, and you could only go for each time you went in.
Right.
You could dump, and then you only got 6 tickets.
Yeah.
And they changed that so that the ticket would last the day.
Right.
But it's now in with the recycling.
Yeah.
So there is no, you're not using a ticket at all. And, even if you're using a ticket, what goes in my Prius
Yeah, sure doesn't.
is very different than what
Yeah.
goes in someone's pickup truck.
Right.
And they're not really, I have never seen people, not never, but for a while they were checking to make sure that you were actually a resident. I don't really see that very much, and I do think that there are probably some people who,
Right.
dump who maybe don't even pay taxes here. So it's just, it's just something to consider, because with the tipping, it's the tipping fees, right, that are going up. Is that relates to that?
Well, no.
No.
Tipping fees
No.
are for the sanitation pickup.
Okay.
What you're referring to is like transfer costs, okay?
Okay.
Because we have to pay to get rid of it.
Right. So, anyway.
Okay. I think we had a question. If you don't mind, Sherman, I think this gentleman was ready to go next.
That's okay.
All right, Sherman, go ahead, Blake. Go ahead, Sherman.
Sherman Cash, Sherwood Drive. Further to what Jenny was talking about, I think it's only a very few people that abuse the recycling center. I go there about once a week. It's convenient to go once a week. I take my corrugated and bottles and things like that. And I know I had something I had to dispose of, and I was told that it's considered construction waste, and I had to take it up to Cheshire.
Yes.
So evidently, and I don't want to point at anybody in the yard, but it's up to them to make sure that people put the right things in the right bins that belong there. I know there was one time they inspected my boxes to make sure that there was no paper or no plastic inside of it. So I think that's just a couple of things.
All right.
I want to ask you about the supervisors and managers. Are they part of a bargaining unit?
Yes.
Yes, they are. Okay. Now, understand, I don't disagree with having these two inspectors. I'm fine. I support that. But I think you might be overlooking something. They should be required to be part of the bargaining unit as employees. You look at a union contract and they'll tell you they're employees, they have to be members of the bargaining unit. As members of the bargaining unit, as employees of the town, they may be entitled to things like Social Security benefits, workers' comp benefits, vacations, holidays, life insurance, all the things that you offer all your other people. So I don't think you're going to get away with paying just a salary. You're going to be paying that 40% bump in benefits, because you don't want to have a discrimination case against you because these employees are not getting what their fellow employees are getting. So I really think you've got to talk to Jeff about that.
We've already covered this, Sherman. So in the case of the two that we mentioned here, one is a retired North Haven Fire Department, he's part-time. The full-timers waived all his rights in terms of other benefits other than a salary.
Okay.
And he won't go in a union.
No, my experience with dealing with the unions, the employee cannot waive any rights. It's up to the union president,
You're right.
union body to waive the rights.
We've covered it both ways.
So you're all covered in that? Okay.
Yes, I'm directly involved with that. So.
That was a little... Have you ever considered minimum, maximum thermostat settings in the buildings in the town? Many years ago, we had a situation where we had shortage of fuel, energy, high cost. We're going to face that pretty soon because the oil-producing nations have cut back on millions of barrels of oil for whatever reason. I don't want to get political. We're going to get fewer supplies, which means higher prices and maybe even shortages and lines at the gasoline stations. Years ago, and many years ago, it's probably 50 years, 40 years ago, we had mandatory settings, minimum, maximum on our thermostats. Sometimes you go into a building, they've got it 65 degrees, when that's a little unreasonable, or they have it 78 degrees. That's a lot of money. It doesn't sound like much, but we have a lot of buildings in this town. Some of them are not very well insulated, and I think it's worth looking into. You have a connection with Johnston Control?
Yeah, they retrofitted all of our buildings years ago, yes.
Yeah, they may be able to give you some insight into how they... I don't know if you can do it legally. I'm guessing you might be able to.
Okay.
And I think that's all I want to talk about, except that I know that we haven't had tax increase, mills increases for years. Some of it because of reevaluation, which meant that the mill rate would go down. Taxes paid might go up, might go down. Not happy to see this increase, as many seniors on fixed incomes, they don't have the opportunity to have an increase in their incomes. So many of them can't even work. They physically are not able to work. I had hoped that you could find some place to bring this down a little bit. Still not too late. You have a referendum coming. I guess that's going to determine whether you leave it as it is or...
Yeah, the next meeting, Sherman, that I present to in May, that'll kind of determine what happens at the May Board of Finance meeting.
Okay. All right, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Anybody else want to make a comment?
Scott Friedman, 17 Cooper Road. First, as I said last time when I spoke to you, I want to thank you for your diligent, process of going through this. This was definitely a hard year. As I've made comment in the past, I wanted to touch on both fire and education. From the education side, I have to admit, I was a little bit disappointed in the presentation of the superintendent, saying that this will not impact student services. There was a $250,000 cut between the Board of Ed public budget workshops and the March 15th Board of Finance meeting. That cut was not discussed in any substantive manner at the March 15th Board of Finance meeting, so it was effectively the incoming assumption in March. Hasn't been changed still. I need to point out that the Board of Ed increase started out below 3%. It is sizably lower than police, fire, sanitation. And while fire was between police on the high end, sanitation in the middle, and education at the low end, it seems like there are far more urgent needs that are not being met on the fire side. And I was a little bit disappointed today to hear you not speak about the Jaws of Life, which I believe were requested because there's a battery that might be sort of at its end of life. Some of the administrative vehicles, which I have to admit, I feel like there might be a middle ground there of potentially outfitting private cars with light bars or whatever it might require to allow our administrative officials to get to the scene as quickly as possible. And also the span of command, which I have to admit, having spoken to folks on the Fire Commission, it seems like there's some question as to whether it's necessary now to do this or necessary later. Regardless, if there are federal investigations into our fire department, and that is something that they recommend, I want to make sure that we are protecting our current residents now. On the education side, it's really more about what we project to the rest of the state. I have, as I said last time, I live right on the border with Hamden. My neighbors are paying 56, mills of taxes. Their housing prices, might differ from ours, but at the end of the day, I know a number of people making marginal decisions between these two towns. I do think that we give an incredible education here, and I also think that there are specific things that we need to be doing better, that we need to be attacking head on, specifically like the COVID learning gaps that everybody are hitting across the board. But fundamentally what I'd like to see is a positive view for the future, where we say we have problems here and we're going to use these funds to address those. I know at this point the budget numbers are set, so at this point it's a matter, I think, of looking forward. As we go forward next time, I think we need to be looking at the fact that I think education basically was working within a box already. And then once they got their cut, the superintendent accepted it gracefully, is the way I would put it. At some level, I want him to be ambitious. I want him to be projecting to other young parents that this is a place that they should move, because it's really about the grand list of the future. Whatever we can say about anyone in town, the new construction housing, the new businesses, I want everybody who works at Amazon to be able to afford a home in North Haven. That does mean keeping the taxes low. I think we're doing a good job of being efficient, as Mike Callahan was saying earlier. At the same time, we have to do that with a look to the future. And to me, public safety is incredibly important, and I think we have an incredibly well-staffed police department already. Seeing that number go up 10%, I would like to see us equalize that, and in the future, make sure that we're funding education, in line with those other departments. Again, I thank you for your diligent work on this, and Mr. Frieda, I really do appreciate the comment you made at the last meeting about keeping further cuts to the Board of Ed off the table. I fully support this budget. I'm going to tell you openly that I'm disappointed with some things that didn't make it in there. I'd like to see us be more proactive about some areas, but I support this budget. I'd like to see it pass, and I will work to make that happen. Thank you.
Great, thank you, sir.
Tim?
Just, can I comment a second?
Yeah,
on this, sir?
go ahead.
Yeah, when people are making comparisons between each department and the bottom line as to how much it may have increased, just remember, once again, what we've said many times before, some of these department increases represent a multi-year contract settlement. And so if you're seeing 10%, it may be really 4.5%, and the rest coming over from the contractual obligation line that is just going to get spilled into that department, because that's, we only show labor, aside from maybe the one exception, we only show labor costs of contracts that are settled, when they're settled. And by the way, the Jaws of Life, is that part of the SAFER grant application or something? You know, well, I think we will find alternative means to acquire that piece of equipment.
There is. So let's say, and I've spoken to the fire department about this. Let's say that something fails. Well, we have $300,000 in contingency. It's an emergency. We're going to get it. So it's going to be there, Scott. We've got a safety net if it goes. The $300,000 in contingency is for that type of an emergency.
And just to remind you, Mr. Fried, I'm sure you recall this from our fire ops day, that we were able to actually evaluate the Jaws of Life system, and we were actually able to use it on a vehicle, a donor vehicle. They actually have one hydraulic Jaws of Life, and then they have at least 3 other battery pack Jaws of Life. So it's not like they have one and it's failing. They have several to choose from. It's always great to have backup upon backup upon backup, and I think they have different levels of strength associated with them, but it's not the case that we are basically telling the fire department you have to operate without this particular piece of equipment. Could I just make a comment about the Board of Education budget? Because I think that, Tim, you made a comment at the very beginning of the public hearing about the $250,000 reduction. And one point that I think is worth repeating over and over again is that this Board of Finance does not have the ability to change any individual line items on the Board of Education budget. So all we can do is appropriate a lump sum amount of money, and we have the ability to either increase or decrease that, and that it is up to the superintendent and the Board of Education to actually figure out how they will actually make those changes. So I was very glad to see that the superintendent was able to make those changes using only 4 line items. He did not have to take $5,000 off of 50 different line items. He was able to do it in pretty substantial chunks from those line items that will not have a direct impact on the students, the staff, the teachers, or the acquisition of educational material. I'd also like to point out that he was able to make those cuts without also touching the increases to the administrator salaries, which, as I've pointed out before, are 9% across the board, some of them as high as 11%. So the taxpayers are actually being asked to reach into their pockets to pay an additional 2 mils of taxes in order to pay for everything, including those higher administrator salaries. So we do not really have a whole lot of discretion when it comes to the Board of Ed budget, but I think we have been able to approve that budget. In fact, for the last 2 years, every dime that was asked of it. And one thing that I'd like to point out, as you've all seen, is we put a lot of time and effort into combing through the town side of the budget, both the town government, the contingency, and the capital budgets, and we really revise it through several iterations and versions that are ultimately presented at the public hearing and the town meeting. The Board of Ed budget, to the best of my recollection for the last 3 years, is created by the superintendent and director of finance in December. It is presented to the Board of Ed in 2 different workshops in January, and based upon the numbers, at least this year, it did not change by 1 dime after the Board of Education was able to ask department heads questions and so forth. That exact same budget that was developed in December was then presented to all of us in the budget workshops. And if Mr. Frieda and the Republican caucus had not requested that $250,000 reduction, it would have been the exact same budget that went all the way through to the referendum. So I think that it's interesting that on the town side of the budget, there's so much variability in response to changing economic input, whether that be the cost of outsourcing or certainly just the cost of inflation. But on the Board of Education side, it is simply a finite and static budget that is created in December and could potentially go all the way through.
So look, I want to say, Nancy, that you had asked for 400,000.
I certainly did. I most certainly did.
So we, in an effort to compromise, came up with 250. I didn't think 400,000 was an appropriate number.
Well, but again, that was a suggestion that I made before we ever had an opportunity to discuss this, and that 250 was communicated before we ever had a chance to meet in March. It was communicated to the superintendent. It was communicated to the Board of Education. It was leaked to the public. I found out about it just through word of mouth, and that was long before we actually got our packets in the mail. So I just think that there's a place for the disclosure of information in a very transparent way, such as a Board of Finance meeting that gives not only the board members, but also the public the context for decisions that have been made, as well as the opportunity to ask questions and receive answers. So that's all I have to say about that.
All right, Mr. Katz, you want to have a follow-up, please?
Yeah, just want to bring up a point. I don't think Scott realizes, I've been here for 55 years, voter, resident. This town has always supported education, all of my 55 years. We had years when referendums were, when the budget was turned down because the Board of Education wasn't getting enough money. This was times before you were born. We've always supported the police and the fire, all the essential parts of this town. I don't see any difference now. We're still supporting education, the police, the fire department, pretty much everything that we need is done. And anyone that says that we don't, I don't think they really know. They're either they don't know what they're talking about, or they're a special interest. Because I mean, I've seen people get up and talk about certain departments, and they were really off the wall. But I think you guys do a good job of supporting every single thing that has to be done in the town. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Chairman. We appreciate that.
That's pretty good. I like that.
I have a comment to make. I would say that this budget process, it's always a challenge, right? There's the Board of Ed, there's police, there's fire, there's different age groups in this town that need more services. But I think what we did this year, it was, I hate to say easy, but we did a lot of collaborating and back and forth, and it didn't take as long as it normally does, where we were here times 10 o'clock at night, and I think we did the best that we could to put this together as a team. And I felt it was much easier, and there was give and take, and I'm proud of what we did.
I completely agree.
Thank you, Diane. Sir, do you have a comment?
Kieran Ahern, 23 George Street. Seems that these comments might be slightly misdirected based on what you just said about the Board of Ed, but I would like to repeat the sort of idea that we should be supporting that a little bit more. I appreciate that there may be viewpoints that disagree with that, but I think if we look at the budget that they actually proposed, teachers are only getting like a 2.4% increase in salaries. 3 of those positions sound like they're actually new positions. So a lot of that increased money won't actually be going as raises. This in a year where we've seen anywhere from 3 to 8% inflation. So a lot of those teachers are also taxpayers, are also homeowners. So, I mean, it sounds like I'm slightly misdirected in where I'm sending this message, but I would appreciate for looking forward, if we're going to keep funding education and we're going to continue to prioritize it, a lot of that money needs to go to the actual teachers themselves and not just passed along through. As you talked about earlier, we want to make sure that those volunteer associations for the fire department are getting the $9,000, because we want them to know as a town that we support them. And like, I think we're seeing a lot of the same increases in salaries to police and sanitation and the fire, as well as the town and even the district administrators. We're not necessarily seeing it for teachers. So I think that'd just be a good thing to keep in mind, that even if the budget seems like it's going up a lot, it's not always necessarily going where it needs to, and some of those increases maybe aren't always sufficient. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Frederick Rodriguez, 27 Westview Road. I want to acknowledge that the budget is a fine orchestration of local priorities and the national economy. The Board of Finance made an increase of roughly 2.6%. And while the U.S. nation is asking all organizations, including government organizations, to keep inflation about 2%, I think this was a job well done. And so there's a lot of discussion about the mill rate. The mill rate is actually classified according to the Connecticut State Office of Policy and Management. The mill rate is equal to $1 of tax for each 1,000 of assessment. So I think when you look at all of those things and put them on the balance, this is a great budget. I think the sad part here is that we ought to have a little bit more transparency in other organizations within North Haven to see how the money's being spent, and so how we can make better projections. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, not seeing anyone else?
I just want to say, I wanted to give a thank you first to, Scott left here, to the many letter writers that got to us through email and other means, and to those who spoke up at the public hearing. We take everything into consideration. And I want to thank the Finance Department for providing us with the many materials that we've requested throughout this ordeal here, including the contractual obligation summary that I asked for. Thank you very much for that. And to my Republican colleagues for listening to everyone, to listening to all parties, and keeping an open mind throughout this entire process. So thank you very much to all. And I agree with Ms. Liciccio here that it was a great team effort. And I also want to once again welcome Ms. Lori Jean Hannon here for her wisdom that she brings to the board, and we look forward to her restaurant recommendations.
You'll have to ask my husband about that.
Thank you, Michael. So just a reminder, the annual town meeting is Monday, May 8th at North Haven High School. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Make the motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Good night,
Thank you, everyone.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.